Hey guys, we are into the book of Colossians, and this is also one of those prison epistles that Paul wrote while in Rome, in prison, to the different churches. And here we're going to see that Paul was writing to the Colossian church because there was false doctrine that was trying to make its way into the church. And this false doctrine was basically two things: syncretism, which is basically the pulling together of different ideas, philosophies, and religions into one, this new idea of what Christianity was. So it was Eastern religion, it was Greek mythology, it was Judaism that were trying to all come together as one. And it was also Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a problem for that first century church regularly. Gnosticism is basically two ideas, and he's going to talk about these, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about them, but it's the idea that matter is evil and spirit is good. And it's also the idea that you could attain to a level of knowledge that could help you get your salvation. And we're going to go into these as he addresses them. But this is why he wrote this entire book. So know this as we go forward. He starts this chapter 1, the way he does most of his books, with a welcome and an encouragement, and then he says what he's praying about them. And I want to look at what Paul says he's praying for this church, because a lot of times we don't know what to pray for people. We want to pray for our church. We want to pray for our pastors. We want to pray for the congregates. We want to, but we don't know what to say. And so often we're left praying for a little bit of time and not going any further because we're out of words. And he gives us this really great list of what he prays for them. And it's the same thing that we should pray for other people. So let's go ahead and look at First Colossians 1, verse 9, and we're going to go from there. This is what he says. He says, "For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you will walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all power, according to his glorious might, for the attaining of steadfast and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father." Now, I'm going to read just kind of a list of things that he prayed over them. And I want to encourage you, maybe this can be your new list. Maybe you have struggled with what to pray for people. You want to be a part of the prayer society, but you can't pray for that length of time. What a great list he gives us. He says he was praying that they would be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. I will tell you, every pastor in the world wants their congregates to pray that over them or over the other people, that they would bear fruit in good works, increase in the knowledge of God, that they would please him and be filled by his strength, that they would have great endurance and patience and stay full of Christ's joy. Paul was praying these things over them, that they would become mature, that they would be vigilant, and that they would be discerning of the false things that want to come in. I first have to say, you guys, false doctrine trying to make their way in the church is not something that the first generation, the first century, second century church dealt with. It's what every single church of all times has to deal with, including ours today. The devil wants to get in, and he wants to put falsehoods inside of our churches. And we need to pray, not only over our pastors, but also over our congregates and our brothers and sisters, that we would be these things. So I encourage you to pray these things. Now, then he goes into 15 and he starts addressing what some of these things are. And I'm going to read 15 because he actually says one of the greatest and strongest sections when he talks about the divinity of God, of Jesus, right here in verse 15. I'd like to read it. It's short. He says, "He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, firstborn of all creation." And this is actually one of the strongest ties to Jesus being divinity in the Bible. This is what he's saying. He's saying in a Gnostic world where the people believed that matter was evil and spirit was good, they had a hard time believing that Jesus was actually God or anything like that, because it was matter, and God would never place his son in a physical human body form because that was evil. Well, Paul comes in and he says, not only is Jesus a reflection of God, he is God. And that was a profound statement at that time. He says, not only does Jesus reflect God, he reveals who God is. And that was a big deal. And in verses from that point, 15 to 23, he starts dealing with these misconceptions. Well, another misconception was that they had believed that God didn't create the world because if the world is evil, God didn't create evil. But right in there, Paul says, no, man, God didn't just create the world. He created the heavens and the earth and everything in it. He talked about how Christ, they didn't believe that Christ was exactly unique Son of God. They believed that Gnostic idea that he attained to a greater knowledge and therefore he knew these things. And Paul in these verses just absolutely destroys this thought. And he's taking these people, Paul is taking them on this good news of the gospel journey because he gets to verse 21. After he refutes all these misconceptions, you're left saying, well, why would God send his Son down to earth? And Paul right there in verses 21 through 23 says, look, here's the deal. God did it out of his good pleasure to reconcile you sinners to himself. And that is just what Paul did. He always went to bring people back to the saving grace of God. He says that you were aliens, that you were not engaged in the family, that you didn't have right there, which is all true. But the Lord, out of his great love and mercy, came down, snatched you up. Even though you were full of blame, he was able to make you blameless before him. And that's what he was drawing this Colossian church to focus on, the actual roots of the gospel. And then in 19, that was 19. And then he follows it up over in 28 and 29. He says this, which I love. He says, this is my job. This is what I've given my life to. This is my focus, that I am going to focus on the good works of bringing people into the complete person of Christ. Not meaning the fullness, not meaning who Christ is, but the maturity of Christ. And that needs to be our job. I love this chapter. I hope you guys did too. It teaches us how to pray, to be vigilant and discerning, and also to take our job to let others know what Christ has done.